Turn off your damn speaker.
Are you sure it isn't someone in the room with you?
Are you sure it's someone in the room with you?
Could be.
Because I think Matt and I both have headphones.
Matt and I both have headphones on.
Okay, I'm just gonna have to mute the speaker for now. So if you guys have questions, I'll open it up.
Mute the speaker for now. So if you guys have questions, I'll open it up.
Okay.
Okay.
Do I have a volunteer?
Do I have a volunteer
After that
extremely fantastic
example of tech in action.
Why don't I?
Okay.
Okay.
Go.
Hmm?
Oh, not to.
So, Doug, twisted my arm. How many people here have actually figured it on a router? I'm so sorry. How many people have configured any other routing protocol? Yeah. No. RIP or OSP? Right, RIP is old. The internet is really, really big. As of yesterday, there were over 500 million prefixes, and there were 48,000 different organizations announcing these things. Traditional protocols don't scale that. Link state protocols hold, like OSPF, they hold they hold the entire topology of the network in memory and calculate every RIP, well, RIP will for anything. So we have to, so BGP takes a novel approach to routing. Instead of routing between routers, we route routing in autonomous systems. HAS is normally an organization like a WANDA or an ISP like Cogent or NSP. And HAS is like RIP, is a vector protocol. So hop count is largely the only method. And the beauty of this is, since we're only counting AS, it hides the complexity of the individual networks, and now it's just one organization to the other. The organizations can't be trusted; they're all administered by different people, most of whom ignore your email or you try to talk to them. And every AS has an AS number, you're administered by ICANN. You get them from your local registry, so wherever you're getting your IP addresses, you can get an AS number. There are a block of high-numbered private AS numbers you can use internally. And your neighboring ASs are interested in most things. Every route in BGP has a couple of attributes. There's the well-known mandatory ones like the AS path and the next copy of merge. They have to be included. There's discretionary attributes that can be included. Optional and must be supported. Optional transitive attributes, which if you receive one and you don't know what to do with it, you don't pass it on. But you're not required to implement it in your region, like communities. And the optional transitive ones that are discarded if you don't know what to do with them. And that includes things like the multi-discriminator. Which is a metric that one can use. First and most important metric. Rather than measuring simple count, it actually records the route as it passes from AS to AS. You're going to dump with an AS path. The shortest AS path is one. And the AS path can also be used to text. AS 9318 advertises if you pass it around. And if Cogent, AS 3491, I had that back and forth. It sees its AS number earlier in the list and drops the rabbit earlier in the list. And this is a simple way to do loop detection. PGP selects the next path using a number of methods. Weight, which is a local metric, local preference, which is a metric that exists within the AS. Routes that are originated with locally aggregated routes, so we'll take two subnets and pass them together and see that. Those shortest AS paths by default. On the most that is the metric used for most route selection. Origin type, or an interior gateway, and multiple exit discriminator. Talk about most of these in the PGP soon. AS path. You can do with an AS. You can control inbound routing with an AS path. You can tell one route to another when you're advertising. Say you have an ISP with an expensive internet connection, an ISP and you want people to use to reach your business you can do something called AS path, where you take your AS number, or you insert it in an AS path multiple times before you advertise for it. Making that AS path is actually longer. And if we look at BGP route, our routers, see here, we're receiving this route. We're trying to use shorthand for that. Our other ISP here, this is a longer AS path. And this AS here, 38091, is 5 different, has their AS 5 times, something like that. 5 times. So they have presented their number 5 times because 38091 reach them through 9848 rather than 1848. So that's one way to control inbound routing. It's the most common way. Now, suppose you have 2 links to the same ISP, and you're looking for one of the other. This is called multi-exit description. When you have multiple paths to the same path, you can adjust that to say, which route you prefer. This isn't used as commonly because you tend to prefer multiple ISPs over having multiple links to the same ISP. There is inbound routing. There's 2 ways to. That's a lot simpler in most cases for most routing protocols. One configures outbound routing, one configures inbound routing. With the local preference, it's a site-wide thing. Every BGP router in your AS should be aware of the local preference of the route. And it's simply it is a metric such that higher the number, the more preferred route is. So say you have 2 ISPs and you want to prefer one for inbound traffic and Sept. There's also outbound routing with the weight option. It's not strictly part of BGP. It's a proprietary option that you can find on Cisco. It's local to the route. So if you wanted to change the routing decisions on a single router, and you had a router that supported this feature, it has precedence over every other metric. It is the first thing your router will look at if it supports it at all. Then there's community streams, and these are the cool part of the protocol. It's an optional 32-bit value. It's transitive. You can strip them out before you pass the router along, but by default they're wrong. They may contain information about the router defined by whoever originates your name. Most commonly they express them as 216-bit words. Typically an AS number and then a value that says metrics from one of their peers. In this case, we don't advertise against 170. So we can say the ISP that you're dealing with right here, they have having routing issues with your coach, and we can tell them just not to advertise that route from somewhere else. And that same also tags on community strings onto routes that we receive to tell us where that route came from. In this case, that came from a route to my PC at home. Tech Savvy came from the community strings let you deal with, or they let you take advantage of all sorts of interesting routing. ISP can publish a list of community strings, what they do, both what the different informational strings are in the actual communities. Some have more fine-grained routing policies than others. And there's actually the Internet Routing Registry where ISPs can publish those routes they can expect to advertise and what the routing policies are, what the community strings are, and send them.
There's something in your router then that like this way.
On normal iOS, it's called a route map. It can do things like match community string and a route preference. Filtering based on the community string and attached route. As somebody in a company that is merely like a customer, typically don't do much with the informational communities. The action communities are much more interesting. On iOS XR devices, they use something called policy language, which is a different syntax, but lets you do similar things. It's slightly more flexible. Anything else? Questions?
Presumably the possibility of screwing the time is here. How do you experiment?
Instead of a routing lab, really, once you connect it to the internet, it's production. And you can do silly things like advertise all the routes from one of the routes from one of the filter. Well, bad things. They have 7,000 every route on the internet, the aggregate 524 was an advertisement. Black hole in most of them. It happened in the 90s. At this point, ISPs started doing route filters on all of their Yep.
I've done multiple times in one round. Multiple times. Increase it to try and
I haven't experienced this personally. Earlier, when you altered the priority for your local route. I think there's an upper limit of 256. The vast majority of SPATs are less than that. I think it's my practice to depend to 5 times and deprioritize route. Is that all? Questions? Questions on the internet?
How many ISPs on the internet?
I have not dealt with very many ISPs. Most of them do implement decent route filtering. I think there's probably more mistakes happen at the sysadmin or netadmin as a customer. Because there's pretty much no place to practice this. Every time we touch it, it's production, and it's easy to break. Build a routing lab at home. My problem is everybody has a routing policy. Everybody has a routing policy. Yeah, I'd probably have to fiddle with our routers once a week.
Turn them back on. Any questions from the cheap seats?
Any questions from the cheap seats?
All right. Thanks, Matt.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
Okay, I'm muting you, Matt. It was. There. I think. Let's see here. Okay. Well, it's this. Do you need to send it to someone?
My wife.
Oh.
I can draw the.
You can show her later. Okay, volunteer for the next speaker. Sure. Oh, you, Mr. Johns, all right.
Hello, my name is David Johns, and I work here at Oenda, and I'm going to talk about Docker because reasons. My talking is about reasons. Reasons in our stuff. Talking issues, ideas. Oh, dang it. It's screwing me up. It likes to autoplay. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. So yeah, this is my agenda. Want to talk about the reasons that one might want to use Docker, what we did, the issues that we were running into and trying to get around, and then some further ideas for how it's probably more useful to other people. So, with that in mind, Docker because reasons. And reasons are things like fast startup. I don't know if there are some other virtualization solutions out there. One of them that I was looking into was Vagrant, that would bring up a VirtualBox instance that we could use as a server. And friends had suggested it to me, and I was looking into it. Well, okay, so we could use a Vagrant instance for serving things. But in my case, what I wanted to do was actually create a development environment that was replicable among the different members of my team. So I was totally looking at Vagrant, and one of the other people was like, try Docker. All right. The first thing I noticed was when you ask Vagrant to up something, it takes a minute, and when you ask Docker to, it takes a second. And that's extraordinarily nice. This is because Docker is using a fairly new feature last couple of years, I guess. The Linux kernel has supported lightweight containers of a sort. And all Docker is really doing, all the Docker project really did, is wrap the existing functionality in the Linux kernel with some nice tools. They put together things that already existed and actually wrote very little of what underlies it. With that in mind, one of the things they put together was a version FS. I can't remember what it's called because the thing is, this version FS underneath something that starts up a virtualized environment quickly means I can checkpoint things. In our case, we were doing a development environment, and so I'd do a little work, and decide that, hey, wait a minute, I have no idea if this is going to work right, and I need to be able to bring it up and test it someplace else. Save things off, go ahead and commit the current events, the current state of the system. Bring it up in another window, try something, conclude that that's a terrible idea, go back to my original. And one of the aspects of this version of FS is you can also export those versions. This was really important to me because the entire point of my interest in Vagrant was the ability to share it with new teammates coming on. The idea was I could just say, look, you need a development environment. We already have 4. Have one. And then the other aspect of this is Docker is not as good as Solaris zones for this, but is definitely an excellent way to get an isolated environment for something that you don't want to kill other processes or interfere with things, testing you want to do that's otherwise needing to be done in a vacuum. All of those things end up being very well isolated in Docker. They're as isolated as you can get without actually starting another piece of hardware in most cases. So, our stuff. As I said, I wanted a clonable development environment. I wanted to be able to, for instance, start it up, do a get pull, and then run our test suite. And it is to the point that we can do that. I have learned some things about our test suite and about our development environments in the process. In particular, we had both external and mocked resources that we're testing against. This is things like, well, we have these payment providers, we interact with PayPal. So we've mocked that up. But we also happen to use DB2, please do not laugh, and that we actually run inside the Docker instance. Regarding that starting up in just 1 second, that's kind of a lie at this point, because of course I have to start DB2 after starting Docker. Anyway, still 10 seconds is better than a minute. And that's why I say that this was a good but not great use case. Ultimately, what we're doing is we're constructing something that has all these resources that a person wants to interact with from a shell or a command line, however you want to think of it, just wants to interact with as a tool for themselves. Like I said, using DB2. Using DB2 meant that we wanted some things that the existing file system implementation didn't support. The unitfs, I can't remember. The existing file system doesn't actually act very quickly, and we'd already decided that we were going to be running DB2 inside a RAM disk. Well, when you dump a RAM disk on something that you just started up as a virtualized lightweight Linux container, amazingly, they don't like it when you try and take 2 gigs of RAM from the main machine. So that immediately put us into this place where we're running it in privileged mode. We're pretty much saying, look, all the awesome stuff that we said, just kidding. We shouldn't let anything in here do whatever it wants with memory. Subsequently, I discovered that dev SHM is artificially limited in size inside Docker, which wouldn't be a big deal, except one of the resources that we decided to not mock up was our own in-house application that wanted 256 megs of shim space. So both of those ended up on the RAM disk, and the solution that I ended up coming up with for this was to create a script that you would run after starting the system that would actually bring up DB2 would mount the RAM disk, bring up DB2, symlink SHM onto the RAM disk, and bring up the other application that required space. One problem that exists in the Docker space that's solved for things like Solaris zones and is not out of the box for Docker is actually connecting to an existing zone. If you're using this for like a server connection or that sort of thing, it's relatively easy to get some useful information from it, but it's almost impossible to go poke around on what it thinks its file system is. Someone has written a wonderful, wonderful tool called NSEnter, Space Enter, It's shipping with Ubuntu by default these days. However, if, like me, you decided to pick on an older version of Ubuntu, it's actually not part of the standard system. And after you've brought up Docker and you realize, I have no way of figuring out what's going on here, then you realize next time you want to install this, save that, and then move on. Kind of as a result of this is the command line that we ended up with that we're using most of the time. These were things that I discovered we needed to do out of the box. The big ones were privileged and the DNS entry. If you're using internal DNS, you have to tell it when you start up. Otherwise, it will decide that it will use 4.4.4.4 or whatever the public. Is it 8.8? I don't remember. There's a public DNS server that people like to use by default, and Docker apparently decided that was good enough for everybody. So one of the things to note is that things are named. You can name specific instances, and then you can also name the images that those instances are derived from. They are also given some numeric references that you can use to start them up or clone them, whatever. But when you finally got something to a good place, you can give it a wonderful, convenient name. The syntax for these names is repository/image name. So the idea is that I'm David Johns, so I didn't want to shove this in front of everybody else. I made my repository djohns, and this is my dev box. So we immediately came up with a whole bunch of things we wanted to do with it as soon as we started playing with it. We use Jenkins here. That is both for our compiles and testing, and it would be awesome if it did the git pull, run tests, and indicate somewhere, hey, look, that worked, without any developer having to do anything other than a commit. And thankfully, that is a well-trod path. If you search the internet, people have figured that people have delighted in this. The application that we're using needs to be pretty well centralized in terms of its API layer, but its UI layers can be brought up to to any degree. So unlike the whole vagrant conversation, if you wanted to bring up 10 of them, and that only takes a second at a time, it's a very, very positive development for places where you want to scale. We also, for some god-awful reason, have these cron jobs that like to retrieve files from one server and put them on another one. And I'm not kidding when I say that that is all they are doing. I really don't want those cron jobs doing much of anything else. And more importantly, if we were, say, serving things up from a place that we were not very confident in, we wanted to share things with public internet, the canonical example being an FTP server, Docker is an excellent way to isolate things, much better than chroot, because people don't have access to the rest of your process space if you're not running it in privileged mode. And finally, sometimes things want Python 2.7 and sometimes things want Python 3.0. And while Python has a solution for that, then you find that they want PyGraphViz 1.4, et cetera, et cetera. So if you construct things inside Docker instances, that is one way that you can manage dependency conflicts on an otherwise awesome, well-managed system. Anyway, so questions, and do you want to demo? And if we don't have time, that URL is awesome. If you're interested in Docker and haven't touched it yet, go there, write that down. They actually have an online demo that you can just go through, bring up an instance, change some things, save it, supposedly, and watch as it gets blown away at the end of your session.
I like to see the demo.
Okay. Do you want to see me bring stuff up or just go to Docker? Either way. All right. I just need a new. I'm going to go ahead and go to the. Come on. Not going to get any larger for people? All right, well, I don't know if you can see. Hopefully the people on the phone can. I gave it a shot. So they're very happy to give us an interactive shell. So like ask, you know, Docker, which version it is. Sign Dave up to some random things. Yeah, exactly. I don't know what that OK was, but I totally hit it. So Docker itself is a command line. And sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier. Because it's using LXC, it is Linux only. If someone was thinking, I can run my Windows boxes there. Unfortunately not. So that is true. You absolutely can run Docker on Windows, which is messed up. Yeah. So what it does is actually use a VirtualBox instance underneath to boot the Linux kernel. And then you get lightweight instances inside it, which is awesome. For reference, that also works on Mac OS. Yeah. So it's good stuff. So there's one thing that I don't like about the way that Docker is designed, but I am willing to change my mind, is there is a shared central repository that they like to direct people to, and as a matter of fact, assume people will use. Oh, come on. Just move on.
You got it.
Yeah, I did, but I wanted to move to the next step. Right. And so, yes, it is going to pull thankfully, because it's happening in a come on, there we go. So if this were being run on my computer, that probably would have taken longer, because as far as I know, that's a full Ubuntu instance that it just downloaded. Let's see. No, I would suggest against it. Well then. I'm not going to run KSH ever, if possible. Oh, yeah, they wanted me to actually run something in particular. Bash, because I want an interactive session, but that's not the most common use case for Docker. In reality, most people use Docker non-interactively to serve things. And number one, that's why NSEnter was such a useful thing to point out to people. But number two, using Bash, checkpointing things over time, I built up this development environment, and I can share it with people, and that's great. But most people use what's called a Docker file to actually create their initial instance. So instead of getting an image, making changes, saving it, most of the time people get an image and then run essentially a script to install whatever they want, etc. Someone asked me why I didn't do that when I presented this to them, and then I pointed out that DB2 has 3 different installers, and one of them requires X. So, no. So I know that it has been done, but most of the time things go the other way, actually. People have, actually I might have misapprehended your question, but what I've seen is most of the time people want Chef and Puppet to use a Docker instance underneath rather than being run inside Docker themselves.
Well, are you using Docker for production?
So not in this case. We're using it on our development environments because that was the thing that I was tasked with creating. I am personally very excited about using it in production, but we're still using Solaris in production. So that's unlikely. I might do it at home. But, Anyway, actually, I'm going to jump out of this and show kind of my thinking. Um, It's a little large, I guess. So these are the artifacts that I ended up creating over the course of my time with creating my development environment. The latest one is tests actually run. Woo! Once I found that we had 3 different ways to run them, then I actually could figure out all the things that needed to happen. As you can see by the timestamps over here, there's a little bit of lag between getting started and my most recent uses. Some of that was vacation, but also part of that was this was good enough, right? For the most part, operating within an instance that was derived from that image the entire time. I saved it off and then double-checked that I had gotten everything correct later. So these are all images. These are not in the shared repository. Unless you push them, they won't end up there. However, if you do push them, they will end up there, which is a little bit unnerving when you're doing things that are under NDA. However,
can you get rid of stuff once you push them out?
So I don't think you can ever really get rid of it. Well, so that's the thing. You can also set up your own local repository. I don't know if Mark Osterveld is actually, he totally went crazy with the, like, let's run Jenkins here and have it kick off Docker instances and let's manage them through a web interface. He's downloaded like 5 different tools for helping manage Docker instances. But we haven't come up with a coordinated strategy yet. So, let's jump back. Come on, close.
But I believe Docker it's like it keeps a history of
Yes.
the images, so
Yeah, you can't.
try wiping it. The
Right.
previous version will still be there.
You have to go in and delete the drive.
You really
Yeah.
you have to jump through.
Sorry.
Sort of.
Yeah. But that's one of the ideas behind Docker was it's supposed to keep your code separate from your configuration data, separate from your. Everybody does that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm trying. So I'm trying to figure out what the best way to do that is.
So if I were in a position to not have to deal with DB2, I would probably try something that involved making a Docker file that actually installed tools that install tools, and then reuse those. Right?
Well, in that case, why don't you put DB2 in a separate container?
So I would love to, but that requires rewriting the way that our tests run in order to make it. Basically, I'd have to be refactoring our code. Well, so
Or is it because the DB2 client uses shared memory?
the DB2 client does use shared memory if it's on the same box, and the tests are written under that assumption. So there are a couple of places where I'd have to go add things that just aren't there yet. Basically, I'm trying to replicate an existing development environment that was entirely on bare metal. And yes, I would love to undo some of the choices that we made, but working with those choices, I end up in situations like this is the first thing that I need to do in order to be able to run these things, is go ahead and kick off some weird mount behavior.
I think Matt is trying to argue your points.
Is he? Oh, he's actually talking about working with Vagrant and DB2. And yes, the gong is actually, I'm way over. But yeah, this was my solution to that problem. Put together a script, let people run it at start time. If we were then, I mean, all you have to do for this to be a decent server instance is subsequently run whatever your server process is. In our case, like I said, reasons and development. So, not so much. Okay. I will accept the gong. Oh, you're welcome.
There is.
Slightly over.
Sorry. What?
I talked forever.
All right.
Just move it quick. There you go. So Ansible, in some ways, we came to that. We had a similar issue in some ways. We were actually trying to find ways of deploying small clusters into AWS. So we needed to be able to say, fairly quickly, create a standardized setup with, say, 10 different systems. We might need some file servers. We might need some small SunGrid engine unit. So Ansible was basically where we ended up for this. And it's basically a platform that it runs kind of like independently of Vagrant. It's quite often used with that. It's a provisioner, a bit like Chef and Puppet, but we found it a lot more transparent and easy to use. So generally it's a very easy way of controlling a set of servers. You basically start with an inventory that has a set of domain names and IP addresses, and classes or groups of hosts with that. And it basically then does SSH to all those machines in parallel if you want it to. It can run commands on those servers, collate results, and it's all using YAML files underneath, which is kind of nice for purpose. So when would you use Ansible? Well, if you want to deploy a standardized set of servers to the cloud, there are plugins for DigitalOcean, AWS, OpenStack, various other systems to actually get them for deployment. But it's also a very good way of just running reproducible tasks on a virtual machine. So as an OS X user, I've actually started using it to do things like make Debian packages, because I can't build a Debian package with OS X. Whereas with Ansible, particularly combined with Vagrant, I can basically just do a Vagrant command, which spins up a VM, installs the right software, runs the Debian packaging, copies the Debian package to my OS X machine, and closes down the VM. That's basically one command. It takes about 5 minutes, but it does it. So it's good for kind of reproducible tasks. In some ways, I'd like to see it run as a way whether we can maybe use that as an alternative to things like Jenkins. So this is an example of what a small part of one of our real config files. This is actually for deploying Perl. It's using a YAML-type macro-y language, so I won't go into this too much. There's about probably 150 different commands or modules. These things, I don't have a command. So at the top where you have under the name, you see things like get URL or a command. Those are the modules that you can use. First one is basically doing a stat command to get a result of whether that file exists and put its result into a variable. And then we use that as a conditional on all the others. So if that file then exists, well, if that file does not exist with all the conditions, then we don't run the following commands. But one of them is going to download a particular version of Perl from cpan.org and put it into a temporary file. The next one's going to create a temporary directory. Third one's then going to unzip it, and it only does that if the configure file does not exist. So it allows us to run these commands in a way where you can rerun the script as many times as you like, and it kind of like carries on from where it left off. That's the kind of logic there. So I didn't do the whole thing. Just go and have a look at some of the documentation on the Ansible.com site. There's hundreds of examples of how the pieces fit together. So under the hood, you kind of work with playbooks, which are a big YAML file that contains all your tasks. Tasks are the actual actions that are run on servers, and they're all designed to be idempotent, so you can run them again. So a typical example might be installing a Debian package. It doesn't matter if you install it again and again and again. The module, effectively, the task will only run when it needs to run. To handle that, because that's not always useful, sometimes you need to detect when there are changes, so there are handlers that you can install when a change has been made, and those can do things like detect if a particular configuration file has changed. The handler is there to restart the service that picks up that change. It's switched to a kind of more powerful include language called roles, which allow you to package up a whole set of tasks for a particular class of machine. That's all using some weird macro language with complex variables. It does get a bit cumbersome when you get to these powerful things. But the idea is that you could have a role which installs Perl, you could have another role that installs Java, and then for a particular type of machine you could say, well, I only need Perl for this type of machine, I need Perl and Java for that type of machine, so you can kind of mix these things together. Typical modules exist just running shell commands. You can add users on a Unix machine. You can download files. You can do things like add users to Postgres or to MySQL and do configuration things there. You can handle file systems. You can mount. You can unmount. You can do the various formatting. Interesting to combine with Docker. I can actually imagine how you could actually use this to systematize the build process for a particular Docker setup. It can handle Apache. It can actually work with Windows increasingly. That's an area where it's rapidly moving at the moment. So this can also do things like install MS on Windows. Ansible.com is the main reference site. Feel free to have a look and see what you make of it.
All right. So who else we got? Any more volunteers? Come on up, Chuck. Up, Chuck.
Oh, yeah. We had to install things with tar.
You had tar? I had a paper.
What did you just do?
I don't know.
Microsoft PowerPoint. Don't say.
Maybe I need to move it on to that.
It's mirrored. Why don't we just try viewing full screen? Do it.
Because I've transitioned. I don't know why I did it this way.
I looked at it earlier. It worked.
Okay, so let's try it again then. Where's your stupid menu? Hey, there we go.
Hey, but it has your notes.
It has my notes are over there. I have my own. Otherwise, I'll ramble and I'll just lose my slot. I'll be here for 20 minutes like Dave. All right, I'm Chuck. I want to preface this by saying I'm not a programmer. I'm a sysadmin. So when people are banning about terms like Ansible and Docker and Vagrant, I see my job disappearing. So that's awesome. All right. So a few months back, I got an email from a recruiter for a job at an unnamed internet company, which been censored for my work longevity. Anyway, part of this, the job is a sysadmin role, which is heavily programming centric, and they say, they ask you a bunch of questions, and then they're like, the next interview will be, you writing a bunch of code, so pick a language that you're comfortable with, brush up on it, and I'm like, sysadmin, not a programmer, and I really haven't coded for a while. I mean, I know a few languages, not all of those, but mostly it's looking at people's stuff to figure out why it might be breaking, but not actually writing stuff myself.
Even misspelled Perl.
So, in my defense, if you put programming languages into a popular search engine, which will remain unnamed, this is one of the first images that comes up. I grabbed it specifically because Perl was misspelled. Anyway, there probably was, yeah. So, I have to learn to program, but the thing is I know how to program, in as much as I am not a programmer, but I know what an array is, I know how to assign a variable. And I've done some stuff in Perl, but it's been more years than I want to admit, so I started looking at some tutorials, and I'm like, I know all this stuff, so I need something to write about. And so just so happens I had a birthday, and I was given a birthday present that gave me an idea. That was a gag gift, but it was a great idea because Connect 4 is a very simple game with the rules set. It's a solved problem. Like, people have written various simulators. It's actually a solved game where they know every stage from like beginning to end. What is a win? What is a draw? What is a loss? Pro tip: if you start in the center, you will win if you make all the right moves. So the code itself pretty simple. You create the board, populate it, and I use a 2x2 array because that's, for me, was the simplest way. And when I first wrote it, it's very C-like looping here. But after I got some feedback from some people, I got a more slick Perl-like way of doing things. And I liked it, so I left it in there. The next you get your you print the board. So this is a looped thing, right? Print the board, get player input and validate it, check for a winner. And my first pass through this, I had an algorithm for up and down. I had an algorithm for left and right. I had an algorithm for the diagonals. And after writing it, I was like, these are all special cases of the same thing. You have a spot, you have the player color, you have a direction vector. So I refactored it and had one algorithm that does all the different solutions. So that's, you guys can look at the code later. Then you check for a draw. And at this point, I've been hacking at this for a few days, and I'm back into it. I'm like, okay, so my board, my empty board is a bunch of underlines, right? Then you'll see a draw later. I can show you an example. And I thought, so a draw is when there's no more underlines, and it's obvious. It's just no more underlines, and there you go. It's a freaking draw. Testing this is not trivial because you have to actually fill up the board and not accidentally make 4 in a row to get to this one. And then you loop through until either you get a win or you end up with a draw. And then you send it to code all your friends and coworkers and say, what's wrong with this? Which is what I did. And I got some great feedback, especially from Dave here and Mark Jubinville, who's not. So I get to the end, and the program, I can show it to you guys after. It's not very long, and it's relatively simple. And as we all know, when you're done, are you done programming? Never. There's always things you can tweak. And I noticed at the time, I had a particular pattern with the number of lines in the program. It was a prime number of lines. And so I tweaked, and I hacked, and I massaged it so that the number of lines, words, and characters were all prime numbers. The functionality didn't change.
You need a life.
I have a kid. I have no life. Anyway, I put it up in the public for people to mock me. And if you guys want to see it, I've got it. That's right here. So it's pretty basic. Okay. I use ANSI term to do clearing the screen and some colors, but aside from that, there's no real special modules for this. So you make your move. I win. Thank you.
That was awesome.
It's going to be JavaScript, Node.js.
How do I get this out of? How do I get this out of full mode? Exit full screen. There we go. Whew. All right. Who we got left? Come on down, Aviana Chow. Okay, 1 second. Let me just get your.
I know that one. Screw that guy.
Because Aviana is awesome, she used the same tool that I did, which is writing all of her slides in one single markdown file.
Like 2K, yeah. Not like 700K.
And a nice little CPAN module.
It's an option thing.
Turns out it text.
All right. Hey everyone, my name is Aviana. I'm one of the developers here, and so I'm here to talk to you today about a non-deterministic natural language feedback system that I wrote while working here. It's not really not that impressive as it sounds. It's a great title. Anyway, so the problem or the challenge that was posed to me was that we have a lot of clients, and they make many similar mistakes. And as a company, we want our clients to be profitable, right? Because when people are making money, they're happy and they rarely leave. That's a good thing. And so also something else in this day and age of like spam and computer generated random junk, we wanted the feedback to look like it came from a person. So because people are more likely to read the content if they think, oh, this is a personalized email or whatever, not just something that is random. Yes.
You're awesome.
Yes. So that was the challenge. And so how did I do it? Well, basically I came up with a like a recursive templating system, or I think some mentioned it's like a macro language, right? Anyway, using template toolkit, and essentially these templates are just like really large strings, defined, and then they comprise of static and dynamic content. And then, so basically the dynamic content can be like variables or functions, and I happen to wrap them in square brackets. I could have used curlies or whatever that I could regex grep. And then of course, so I use regex to capture whatever's inside the square brackets, and then I evaluate the string until there are no more square brackets in the string left, at which point it's considered fully, it's ready for presentation. All right, so what does this all look like? Okay, so here's like a super simple example of a one-liner. So you had, and then inside you got a variable called non-profitable trade. So that would evaluate to an actual number, and then non-profitable, the word, and then trade with another. So in this case, it's a function call where we're passing in the variable non-profitable trades in there, and so the function will return if the number is like 0 or 1, it'll return nothing. If it's greater than 1, it'll return an S, in which case you get trades. Pretty simple, right? So the end result, the end templates ended up being fairly large because like generating like pages of well, okay, not pages. We try to keep it like a page or so because when it's too long, people also don't read it. Anyway, so we started with defining small blocks of interchangeable text, and then assembling, using that to assemble them into larger paragraphs of text. And the interesting bit is that the more interchangeable blocks I define, the more variety of feedback we get by running it through the system. And that's the non-deterministic part. So here's some more examples. So this is like when we talk about trades, usually a trade has some number of units associated with it. So here I just define a variable, n units is, I take the number of units and I commaize it, which just means, put a comma at the thousands marker. So, it looks good. And then the word unit with the pluralization of if, if the units is greater than 1, then the whole S thing again. And then I define another thing here called trade info. Again, when we talk about trades, usually trades have some ID associated with it. And then a trade also has a direction. It's either a buy or a sell. So that's what this FN trade direction thing does. It'll, based on the thing that we pass in, the type variable, it'll return either buy or sell. And then here we're referring to the n units variable we just defined above. And then at the end here we have the currency pair nice name and then passing the actual currency pair. So that just turns something that's a little bit cryptic like XAU USD into gold. So it's nicer to look at. Okay, so the other interesting bit about this project is try to sort of replicate human speak. And people, what I realized is that people say a lot of say the same thing in a lot of different ways. And when we talk to each other, we don't give like exact numbers. We tend to ballpark. We like give rough estimates. So some examples. So for some small number, like 5 or 3 or whatever, we might say like a few or a number of or a couple. It all means the same thing. Another example for percentages, like nobody's gonna talk to you and say, oh, it's 68.39%, right? Or unless you're Sheldon Cooper. And then so for depending on the sentiment that you want to impart, you can emphasize the percentage positively or negatively. So for like 68.39, you could, if you want to de-emphasize the number, so you can just say, just over 60%. But if it's a good thing, then you might want to emphasize it, and so you would round up and you say nearly 70%, right? So these are different, tricks that, like people, when we talk about things, we do this naturally as people, right? And then some, different phrases that mean the same thing, or very similar things, or have the same meaning. So you have non-profitable, or this is when we apply this phrase to a trade, right? So non-profitable trade, a losing trade, or unsuccessful trade, so on, right? So when we put it all together, right? So this is like again a very simple example. So in the last report period, that would evaluate to some string, right? You had a function call here which renders some sort of a human percentage based on the variable the value that you pass in, and then we're taking some randomized version of the non-profitable phrase that we pass in, and then trade with the polarization function, right? So what does this actually generate? Well, it could generate something like, in the last month, you had nearly 70% non-profitable trades. Or it could become, in the past 30 days, you had a vast majority of losing trades. Or it could become, did you know we offer webinars teaching trading fundamentals? Because you clearly have no idea what you're doing. I never could get this last one past legal. They wouldn't let me put it in there. I thought it was very direct and to the point.
And very positive.
That's right, yes, that's right. Anyway, and on that bombshell, that's all I have today.
Actually program some simple options in there. So you have the opportunity to be like, yes, give the downward version of this.
Yes, they're yeah.
Okay.
So you talk about responses. And you can also include emoticons and smiley faces.
Okay.
We can do all sorts of things with this thing.
Because you have no idea what you're doing.
So I know we have 2 talks for sure. I'm not sure if you were still interested in giving your talk. Did you want to? You need internet? Sure. We got they took it off the wall.
Oh, dang it. I'll go ahead.
Okay, you go ahead and I'll go find the guest Wi-Fi access.
I got it.
Oh, you got it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, the software is just like very small and randomized operate. Have more larger chunks of things that means similar.
So you
randomized at every single level. So when you run this through the same, there's the phrase, for example. But it's the similar sentiment. There's different ways of saying it. That gives people and also it also includes examples. So they'll have like a sentiment block. Right? Here's basically essentially what you did, right? And for example, this is one of your example what you did, and actually help say for another, whatever number of hours you could actually bother. Or we could say, so there's all sorts of patterns, like super simplified it, because I thought we were really doing the 5 minute thing.
Most of us are.
I'm gonna try. See.
They call this CEOs.
Generate their thoughts and
Yeah.
that great synergy.
All right, I'm going to talk about app onliner, this module that I wrote. It's kind of like it's a scripting language in itself, right? Although it's you'll see it in a sec, but it's its own little language. But basically, I'm sure everyone here has written like a million one-liners, right, on the command line, right? You just whatever. So here's like the typical day in the life of a Unix hacker admin, whatever, right? Like say you've got this big Apache log file, and you see HTTPD processes chewing up all the resources. Well, figure out which IP is causing all the problems, right? Well, here's like the standard, one of the things you could run there. You just grep out. You see report CGI chewing up the CPU. So yeah, you grep out all the hits to report CGI from the access log, and then you extract $1, which is the first thing in the log file. That's the IP address. And then you sort it, and then you unique it, and then you reverse numeric sort it. That's the standard tallying. So you get the nice little report, and you see that, oh yeah, this .29 IP has been hammering it millions of times, so we can go, we know who the culprit is, right? Standard Unix pipeline hacking, right? Problem with that is that so you write it once, it's not really modular. It's it's like one kind of thing. It's not really refactorable. You just hammer it out, you throw it away, right? Onliner is kind of designed like if you are writing these things often, and they're often really similar, I've noticed that a lot of mine are, and you want to actually reuse them and make them modular, then onliner is what you can use. So really all you have to do to use onliner is copy and paste that command line that you ran in your shell, and then wrap and put it into a file, and then wrap def main and curly braces around it, right? And you can also get rid of the backslashes; they're not needed anymore, right? So bang, I just fire that into this def main, and then put that in a file called log report, and then yeah, you can if you want, you can run it with onliner log report, blah blah, or you can make it executable and run it just like a script, right, like a program itself, and that'll work exactly the same as if you ran the thing on itself, right? Unfortunately, access log is hard coded and stuff. I'll show you how to improve that in a sec. But yeah, one of the great things that you can refactor this, right? Like the really standard IP extractor, you can just put that into its own little def, and then it can be called just like a program inside the def main, right? And then also tally, the same sort of thing. It's these three pipeline components that are kind of glued together, right? And you put that in your def main, and you can have libraries of commonly used pipeline components, and you can call out to them from your own def main, whatever, and stuff like that, right? Another really powerful thing is you don't want to hard code arguments and stuff like that, so you can use $add, right? Same as bash, and that kind of passes through the arguments on into wherever you want, right? It's actually better than the shell version because as if you go forget the quotes, then it'll won't pass the spaces in through and so on, right? So I've kind of decided to improve on shell in the places where it's possible. And then another thing is you can also add switch parameters, right? Here you see it's head, which is the long form of the argument, and then h, which is the short form, and then equals I, that's the integer. This is standard get opt long, by the way, right? So if you know the get opt long syntax, you can do that, right? And at that point, when you run your program, you go, onliner log report, you can go -- head and then 6 or whatever, and see the head 6 first lines, right? By default, everything inside a def is this language called shell, right? And it's actually this special implementation of a pseudo sort of limited bash sort of language that onliner actually doesn't even need shell at all. It never ever calls. If you didn't have binsh in your system, you could still use onliner, right? Everything is implemented in Perl. But if you want to, you can also put other languages inside your defs, right? So here I'm doing a Perl. Inside here, the first one, there's the Perl language, right? And you can just write your regular Perl code, right? Perl-n. Yeah. So yeah, your defs, they don't have to call out to other programs and pipeline components. You can write your code in line if you want to, right? And there's also a def modifier for Python, which is actually kind of annoying to write because you want to indent it, but if you indent it, you need to de-indent it before you pass it to Python because you can't start lines with spaces. But anyway, you can write Python, and there's awk and and general exec stuff. You can do all this stuff, right? Another thing is if you pass the template modifier, you can the defs are actually interpreted by template toolkit before being processed, right? So and they also have access to the arguments, right? So here's, for example, if you wanted to have an option on your script where you could filter out localhost. But you only want to create the grep process if you actually pass in that argument. You can use template toolkit to script that as a conditional, right? In this case, no grep process will even be forked and exec at all unless you passing that dash filter localhost, right? And the other thing is it does like basic optimization sort of stuff too, right? Like for example, cat elimination, right? Normally, like you guys have all heard of like the useless use of cat and how you should never use cat, but there's actually some situations where cat's nice. Like if you want to make it so that it will either slurp from standard in or a file provided, then cat is useful for that, as we're doing there first. And then trailing cats are sometimes useful if you want to prevent terminal processing for a file, for a process. Like, you know, less adds like terminal escapes and crap, right? So you can add a cat there, right? And then sometimes the combination of those result in internal cats, right? So unliner, before it processes it, actually eliminates unnecessary cats, right? So here you can see that it's optimized out all cats in this case, right? Yeah, basically, yeah. So yeah, unliner, it's like maybe when you write your one-liners and before you like scrap them and rewrite them as quote-unquote real programs, maybe you try unliner and you find you don't actually need to rewrite it as a real program after all. It's on CPAN, app unliner.
Do you call out the system programs themselves?
No, fork and exec them directly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when someone passes you sort, you call the Unix or you don't use this also.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
The other question,
Wanna
do you have
come on up, Ruben, or
what other package
plug into the
are you
projector?
running on?
So it depends on Redis grammars to parse the shell language, and the type language, and you get off long for the argument parsing, and template toolkits and templates, maybe a couple other ones. Yeah, those are the big ones.
So apologies to anyone still on Google on the Hangout. We unfortunately have. Oh look, that's not on. We don't have this online, so you're going to miss the next talk. So our apologies. And because I'm a lousy leader, Ruben contacted me like a week ago, and I only got back in touch with him about an hour before this meeting. So thank you for coming in and doing this.
This is a search engine completely in Perl. It's called lunajobs.ca. It's not online yet, but I have it locally, so I want to show how it works. This is a search engine that uses natural language processing to find jobs all around the web. So the main difference between other job aggregators is that it finds like jobs that are not in Google or in other like aggregators because it uses natural language processing. So this is the backend. It's Perl, Modulicious, MongoDB, Redis, and Elastic MapReduce for the text processing and analytics. And Solar is the main search. That is, yeah, it's used to scene. I used to use only Perl, but Solar is way better. So basically, what I do is I crawl. I have a seeds. I'm gonna show the seeds in a second. So I collected this from different sources, and I have a big list of seeds of Canadian companies on the website. And then I use a web crawler. Everything is in Perl. Everything is in EC2, and I crawl the web until I find job postings. And what I do is it uses a lot of natural language processing. So I got a lot of job posting from Craigslist, all this, and then I extracted the ontologies to find how a job posting looks. And this is the end result. The last time I crawled the web was 5 months ago, so there's not. So yeah, so it's. But for example, we can. For example, if we do the chef, we have links to the exact job posting. So you can see it says the hours, the reports, and everything. And this is not the newest version, but the newest version uses named entity recognition to extract locations, hours, salaries, and that will show in the search screen instead of having to click. And this is so this is the last time I called. I got all these job postings, and we can like paste anyone and see it's well, this is a job at link form, but yeah.
These commissions are more efficient than Korea, but they keep sending me commission furniture, so.
So these are like exact job postings, and so it finds exactly the job posting, and the accuracy is very high. The way I do it is with the vector space model. So basically, every document, every web document is I convert it into a vector, and then I extract the collocations, and then I use a vector space model to see which vectors are close to each other in order to find all the job postings. And the accuracy is very high. It returns some link farms, but most of the time it's the exact job posting, so it's very accurate. And it's all in Perl. I think the most important modules are Parallel Fork Manager. That's for all the web crawlers. I use PDL for all the mathematics behind it. I use the name entity recognition module for extracting dates, compensations. I use Modulicious for everything, for the CSS selectors, the crawling, and I use Dolly Mechanized basically for the web crawling, and because it's very good for breaking forms. For example, where the forms that says, where it asks you like what type of job do you want, the engineering or whatever, and I use Dolly Mechanized for that. The things that I learned is that fault tolerance is very important, because I crawl millions of web pages, and if something breaks, I don't want to share memory. I don't want to have everything breaking. I log everything, and object oriented programming is very good. That's the main things I have learned. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Are you using MapReduce for the crawling portion?
No, I'm using MapReduce only for the text. Yeah, only for the text processing. Any other question?
What on earth possessed you? Did you have background in this natural language processing, or
no?
No. What kind of time did it take you to get to where you are?
What do you mean?
Like how long did it take you to build what you've built so far?
It took me like a month or 2 months, because I mean that's why I use Perl, because it's really fast for prototyping, and it has a like text processing is very good. So I think it's yeah, most of the I did it so fast because I use Perl. Yeah.
So what's your motivation? Is this a learning exercise or get rich maybe quickly? Because you're going to make the website public and get
I mean, make money, but like it's something I've always been very interested in, and I've learned a lot. Because, for example, the first time I did it, well, my motivation actually was there's another company that does that. It's called Luda, but they're not using machine learning at all. Because I talked with the CEO, and they told me there's a lot of human interaction, so it doesn't scale. There's a lot of human interaction. So he said we tried to use machine learning, but we failed. So I did it myself, and the first time it had like 67% accuracy. It returned a lot of results that were not, and then I started changing the way that I use natural language. I went, for example, now it uses a vector space model, and then it uses k-means clustering to find all the job postings. And it's very accurate, and it's very, I mean, it's fun for me, and I've made a lot of modules that I might publish later. For example, a login module, a spider module, and all these things that I might publish if I feel like. And yeah, it can make money because it's automated. It's only me, and it scales very good. So I could, I'm right now only, it's not up, but it only pulls Canadian jobs. Then if I want to control American jobs from any country, because it scales well, because it's natural language processing, machine learning, and not, it doesn't need human interaction. So.
Have you been breaking dimensions out in Solar? I don't know what they call them, but giving it things like, oh, I want jobs in Manitoba, and then you can choose the.
Yeah, the locations are extracted by the name entity recognition.
And so, are you doing natural language search on those, or are you actually making them? I know Solar lets you kind of pick, say, like categories that you can add.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's just only natural. Like I haven't any I'm not using any specific category. I'm just using the body and the. But the new version, it's more like it has more metadata because I extract all the starting dates, the compensations, and all these things. So you can search by compensation, starting dates, whatever.
Okay.
So.
Is the PDL for the vector space stuff?
Yeah, all the mathematics is with PDL. Nice. Yeah, that's what I use for the PDL. And, most of the things are like I coded by myself: the vector space model, the k-means clustering, all the machine learning and natural language things. So, yeah, many other classes.
So if you're interested in giving a wider talk on this and drill down further, we'd love to have you.
yeah, of course I could.
Thank you very much.
And I think we have, unless I'm mistaken, one more talk. Are you good to go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a different kind of thing because this is actually a business bit. So on the ground, at least you see this already.
Oh.
Okay. So this was a friend of mine. We teamed up for ENT 101 in Mars last year, and we actually, one of the challenges was to actually try and encourage you to develop a business idea. So we did. We're still going with it. The idea was basically we were interested in email and the fact that we would quite often get emails from senior people, quite surprisingly often senior people who managed to fail to communicate particularly well with email. So we'd get emails from our bosses, and it'd take you 2 or 3 days to actually decompress from the stress and anger that sometimes just a few lines had just managed to create. So we started to look at the problems of email. It's just, it's astonishing how much email is actually sent. It is a huge proportion of business communication. It's one of the biggest sources of tensions in the workplace. It's just astonishing. And, you can see it in the academic research, the business literature, it's all very clear. It's just a huge, wide-ranging issue. So we were thinking basically email's a problem. We have both personally experienced email that winds us up. How many people here can remember having an email that's just made you want to scream? So a good proportion. Yeah.
How many were just today?
So we're not alone.
Just seeing the name of the sort of sender.
Yeah. So basically what we were starting to do is to say, can we actually build psychometrics, because I'm a psychologist too, that could actually really turn into a kind of training package where people could try out emails and get some kind of idea of how people might respond, and basically turn that into a training package that you could give to managers to help them learn how to use email more effectively and understand the impact that their words might actually have on people. So we started developing an email feedback tool. Again, it's natural language processing type techniques, but we're trying to drill really into the texts and to identify some of the stresses that are used and the kind of the way that the social relationship is actually reflected in the text. So we're currently working on this. The Enron corpus, all the emails in Enron are basically public. So you can actually use those to train things up. So we're working with those, trying to develop ways of identifying the stresses in those and manage that in. So what are we actually doing? Well, it's all commercial at the moment, but I can tell you some of it. In fact, all of it, basically, because it's really going to come down to actually how we train machine learning up. We're using psychometrics. There's this, a model from Robert Bales called the interaction process analysis, which is basically looks at actually how people ask questions, provide answers, the kind of patterns that emerge. So we're using that as a lot of the basics that we can do. We're throwing the data into Mechanical Turk to try and actually get some scoring of the kinds of messages that people see. And there's quite a lot of intuition and experience and just expertise built into it as well.
And maple syrup.
And maple syrup, because we're Canadian, yeah. So it's a fairly big market. The training market sounds smaller than I actually thought, but this is actually the revenue of Canadian companies that do professional skills development in Canada. So there's a reasonable market out there if we can get into it. There are trade shows are a good place to meet. So we've actually booked at the Human Resources Professionals Association trade show in November, and we're going to launch something there in 2 months' time. But I've got to build it before then. So that was the email idea, but we actually think it's a bigger area as an area. Appraisals are another great one. I was noticing that there's someone called Kieran Snyder. She's actually looked at how, in particular, there are strong gender biases in the language that's used in appraisals of women. That actually it's quite terrifying. Certain kinds of metaphors are almost exclusively used in a way that's actually quite negative. So I think she's launching a company to try and actually tackle HR appraisals. We'd independently thought that there's a wider issue with appraisals. I mean, she's actually focused very nicely on a very specific and concrete area. But I think, the language in appraisals can be just as problematic. So we're looking at that. We think social media is a big area to go. In academic life, journal reviewing and project reviewing, you're getting, again, feedback from people. And again, academics are notoriously bad at communicating. And some of the reviews I've seen have just been appallingly negative in their structure. So if we can provide tools that can help field those and identify the ones that seem to be particularly problematic before they go to a journal author, I think there's a potential area there. And actually anti-bullying, use of training kids in schools to learn to use language more effectively and maybe recognize some of the signals that they may be sending, even without meaning to in their postings. That's another area that we're sort of looking into. So there's a bigger context there. So that's kind of like what we're up to. If you know of any companies that might be interested, do tell us. We'd love to extract some money. No, we'd love to. We'd actually love to have a customer that would be really willing to work with us and develop a sort of lunch and learn type program that we could maybe run in a lunch hour and sort of experiment a bit in actually refining our materials. So if you know any companies that might be interested in a few informal sessions in how to use email more effectively, then please let us know. Thank you.
That's right now, we got one generator.
Have you ever seen the dialogue between Eliza and
Here's the Dan's question. Tell me about your mother. Blah, blah, blah. Harry is a generator of paranoid responses. The two of them talking to each other is fun.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you to all the speakers, many of whom I personally browbeat into coming here this evening. I really do appreciate it. that was a really fantastic group of talks. I learned a lot of different things. It covered a lot of different subjects, and some of them were even related to Perl. So, and for the record, we do this every year in September. It doesn't have to be Perl. As you can see, we covered a lot of different things, and that was really awesome. And thank you so much.